Iraq, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, launched a military invasion on Iran on September 22, 1980. The Iraq-Iran War, spanning from 1980 to 1988, emerged from decades of geopolitical rivalries, territorial disputes, and ideological differences. The conflict not only altered the landscape of the Middle East, but also left a profound impact on global politics. The total number of casualties varies from several hundred thousand to over 1 million dead. The roots of the war can be traced to the 1975 Algiers Agreement, which temporarily resolved the Shah al-Arab waterway dispute between Iran and Iraq. However, the agreement failed to address the underlying issues, and the rise of Ayatollah Khomeini's revolutionary Iran in 1979 further escalated tensions. Saddam Hussein's Iraq, seeking to capitalize on Iran's revolutionary turmoil, perceived an opportunity to expand its influence in the region. The Iranian Revolution of 1979, a seismic event that overthrew the autocratic rule of Shah Pahlavi and established an Islamic Republic, played an important role in the shaping of the dynamics of the Iraq-Iran War. The revolution not only transformed Iran's political landscape, but also had far-reaching implications for the region, contributing to the outbreak and trajectory of the war. The Iranian Revolution inspired a wave of Islamic fervor across the Middle East, posing a direct challenge to the secular regimes in the region. Khomeini's vision of exporting the Islamic Revolution was met with suspicion and fear by neighboring countries, particularly Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Hussein, afraid of Iran's revolutionary ideology spreading to Iraq's Shiite population, viewed the revolution as a direct threat to his rule. Saddam Hussein, calculating that Iran's post-revolutionary turmoil would leave it susceptible to attacks, saw an opportunity not only to eliminate a potential threat, but also gain an upper hand in the region. He calculated that Iran's revolutionary zeal would be offset by internal strife, which would weaken its military and political capabilities. Hussein's ambitions for territorial gains and regional dominance prompted Iraq's invasion of Iran in 1980, initiating the brutal war that followed. The ideological chasm between secular Iraq and revolutionary Iran deepened the conflict's intensity. Iraq, under Hussein's rule, sought to protect its secular identity from the influence of Khomeini's theocratic state. The war thus became not only a battle for territorial control, but also an ideological confrontation between two fundamentally different visions for the region's future. The Iraq-Iran War served as a catalyst for the division of the Arab world along ideological lines. The Arab states, particularly those with Sunni majority populations, were apprehensive of Iran's revolutionary ambitions and aligned themselves with Iraq to counter the perceived Shiite threat. This polarization deepened existing rivalries within the Arab League and reshaped the region's geopolitical landscape. The Iranian Revolution's profound impact on the Iran-Iraq War cannot be overstated. The revolution's ideological underpinnings, regional aspirations, and internal challenges set the stage for the conflict's outbreak and progression. The war was not merely a clash of military forces, but also a collision of secular ambitions and geopolitical calculations that continued to resonate in the Middle East's contemporary complexities. Saddam Hussein's ambitions culminated in the September 1980 invasion of Iran. The surprise attack led to an intense conflict marked by territorial gains and losses, trench warfare, and relentless air and missile strikes. Initially, Iraq was successful. By the end of 1980, they had captured 15,000 square kilometers of Iranian territory. However, they underestimated the strong resistance that the Iranians would put up in response to the post-revolution chaos. By June 1982, Iran managed to regain all the lost territory and even launched a counter-offensive that lasted for the next 6 years. Various forces fought on different sides, including the People's Mujahideen of Iran fighting for Iraq and Iraqi Kurdish forces fighting for Iran against Saddam Hussein. One of the fascinating aspects of this war was Iran's need to fight for its survival almost entirely on its own, while Iraq enjoyed concrete support from both sides of the Cold War. Both the US and the USSR supported Saddam in the war against Iran, along with Britain, France, and most Arab countries. The only countries supporting Iran were China, North Korea, and two Arab nations that refused to side with Iraq, Libya, and Syria. The infamous Iran-Contra affair was also part of this period, during which the US was secretly supplying weapons to Iran, allegedly in exchange for the release of hostages in Lebanon and to fund Contra militants in Nicaragua. Turkey remained neutral, not selling weapons but engaging in trade with both Iran and Iraq during the war. One of the war's most harrowing aspects was the extensive use of human wave attacks by Iranian forces. Facing limited weaponry and resources, Iran often employed massive infantry assaults to overwhelm better-equipped Iraqi defenses. While these tactics were born out of necessity, they led to staggering casualties on both sides and a profound human cost that underscored the brutality of the conflict. These mass charges of often minimally armed soldiers against a stronger and more advanced enemy in an attempt to overwhelm them through sheer numbers included mostly young men, sometimes even children as young as 14. They were told they had a sacred duty and that God would make them invincible. They charged through artillery fire, machine gun fire, minefields, and airstrikes. As one of Lebanese journalists who witnessed this stated, there were more people than the Iraqis had bullets. Despite enormous losses, this self-sacrificing Iranian tactic, rooted in the ideal of martyrs, ultimately paid off. They managed to repel the much stronger enemy, and by 1982, Saddam sought a ceasefire. However, Ayatollah Khomeini ordered an offensive, invading Iraq and capturing the holy city of Karbala and the strategic port city of Basra. This led to years of heavy fighting with little change in the front lines. Only towards the end of the war did the Iraqi army start gaining victories on the ground, prompting Iran, also exhausted, to agree to a peace treaty with Iraq. Trench warfare, machine gun emplacements, bayonet charges, the terrifying Iranian human wave attacks, intense use of chemical weapons by Iraq, and deliberate attacks on civilian targets. In the end, the war concluded without changing the borders. Saddam hoped that by seizing the oil-rich province of Khuzestan, he could deal a blow to Iran that would lead to the collapse of the revolution. He also aimed to position Iraq as a leading power in the region, possibly even the entire Middle East. However, he made a major miscalculation. He expected Arab Iranians to side with him, especially in Khuzestan, but they fought for the Iranian Revolution. One of the most horrific aspects of the war was the extensive use of chemical weapons by Iraq against Iran. The usage of chemical weapons was actively supported by the US, West Germany, the Netherlands, Britain, and France. A CIA report from 1991 estimated that about 50,000 Iranians were killed in chemical weapon attacks. So what happened after the war? Iran survived. The Iranian Revolution persisted, but the West continued to treat Iran as an enemy. And what about Iraq? Saddam, who failed to achieve his war goals, felt somewhat betrayed by the West, which had pushed him into this bloody conflict. As a result, 2 years later, he invaded the neighboring oil-rich Kuwait. He even believed that the US allowed him to do so, a mistaken interpretation. The US launched an attack on Iraq, initiating the First Gulf War. Iraq was devastated by US and Allied airstrikes. Kuwait was liberated and Saddam was subjected to a no-fly zone, monitored by the Allies. This process also led to the creation of the autonomous region of Iraqi Kurdistan, as Saddam had extensively used chemical weapons against the Kurds. This marked the beginning of the end for Saddam Hussein, once a friend of the West, now an enemy. The final blow came in 2003 when the US invaded Iraq, 2 years after invading Afghanistan, claiming Saddam possessed weapons of mass destruction. If he ever had such weapons, he had used them against the Iranians, and they were provided by those who were now invading Iraq. Iraq became subservient to the US. Saddam was captured, convicted, and hanged. However, the majority Shia rule in Iraq today means that Iraq has relatively good relations with Iran. In other words, the US made a mistake in thinking that a post-Saddam Iraq would transform into a democracy and a loyal ally. Instead, they faced an even bigger problem: the expanded influence of the Iranian Revolution.